Karoline Leavitt wasn't your typical journalist. She was young, ambitious, and had a knack for uncovering stories that others were too afraid to touch. Her work wasn't just about chasing headlines. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made people feel. Over the past few years, she had built a reputation as someone who didn't back down, even when powerful figures tried to silence her. But little did she know, one of her investigations would lead her straight into a courtroom showdown that no one could have predicted. It all started with a story that seemed ordinary at first, a routine investigation into local government spending. Karoline had been tipped off by an anonymous source claiming there was something fishy going on behind closed doors. At first glance, it looked like small-time corruption, inflated contracts, questionable payments, and favors being handed out to friends of those in power. But as Karoline dug deeper, she realized this wasn't just some minor scandal. It was part of a much bigger web involving influential politicians and high-ranking officials. Her report hit the newsstands like a bombshell. People were outraged, demanding answers from their leaders. Some praised Karoline for her bravery, while others accused her of exaggerating or fabricating details. Among the loudest critics was Judge Harold Grayson, a man known for his sharp tongue and short temper. He wasn't directly mentioned in Karoline's article, but he had close ties to several individuals named in the investigation. To make matters worse, one of the implicated officials decided to sue Karoline for defamation, dragging her into court to defend herself. Walking into the courtroom that day, Karoline felt a mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't her first time facing tough questions, but something about this case felt different. The stakes were higher, and she knew the outcome could either validate her work or tarnish her credibility forever. As she took her seat, she couldn't help but notice Judge Grayson glaring at her from the bench. His expression said it all. He wasn't happy to see her there. The hearing began with formalities, but it didn't take long for things to get tense. From the moment Karoline opened her mouth to speak, Judge Grayson seemed intent on cutting her down. He interrupted her mid-sentence, challenged her facts, and dismissed her arguments with a wave of his hand. It was clear he wasn't interested in fairness. He wanted to assert his dominance. At one point, he leaned forward in his chair, staring straight at her, and said, "You're nothing but a reckless amateur trying to play hero. Do you even understand the damage you've caused?" The room went quiet. Everyone present could feel the weight of his words. For a brief moment, Karoline hesitated, unsure if she should respond. But then she remembered why she was there, to stand up for what was right. Taking a deep breath, she calmly replied, "Your Honor, my only goal is to bring attention to issues that affect our community. If that makes me reckless, so be it." Judge Grayson scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Reckless? That's putting it lightly," he shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've ruined lives, destroyed careers, and now you sit here acting like some kind of saint. Don't insult my intelligence." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karoline's heart raced, but she refused to let him see her crack. She reminded herself that this wasn't about her. It was about holding people accountable. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was far from over. Little did she know, help was already on its way. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Karoline sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly together to stop them from trembling. She could feel the weight of Judge Grayson's words pressing down on her, but she refused to let him see her falter. The room was packed with spectators, some curious bystanders, others supporters of the official suing her, and a few who had come just to witness the drama unfold. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting to see how she would respond. Judge Grayson wasn't done yet. He leaned back in his chair, his expression smug as if he'd already won this battle. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice loud enough to echo through the silent courtroom. "People like you think they're doing the public a favor by stirring up trouble. But all you're really doing is causing chaos. You don't care about justice. You care about headlines." Karoline felt her cheeks flush with heat, but she kept her composure. She knew better than to argue with him directly. It would only play into his hands. Instead, she chose her words carefully. "Your Honor," she began, her tone measured but firm. "If shining a light on corruption causes chaos, then maybe that's exactly what we need. Justice doesn't happen in the shadows, it happens when people are brave enough to speak up." Her response drew murmurs from the crowd. Some nodded approvingly, while others whispered disapprovingly. Judge Grayson's face darkened. Clearly, he hadn't expected her to push back so calmly. For a moment he looked like he might explode, but instead he slammed his gavel down hard on the bench. "Enough!" he barked. "This isn't a debate club. I'll remind you where you are, young lady." The sharp crack of the gavel made everyone jump, including Karoline. But inside, she felt a flicker of defiance. She reminded herself why she was there, to defend not just herself but the integrity of her work. Still, the judge's hostility was relentless. He continued to interrupt her every time she tried to present evidence or explain her side of the story. Each time his comments grew sharper, more personal. "You're wasting everyone's time here," he snapped during one exchange. "Do you even realize how ridiculous you sound? You're just a kid playing journalist. What do you know about real consequences?" Karoline swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. She wanted to shout back, to tell him exactly what she thought of his bullying tactics, but she forced herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't help her case. And deep down, she knew he was trying to provoke her, so instead of responding, she simply nodded and waited for him to finish, her eyes locked firmly on the papers in front of her. As the hearing dragged on, the atmosphere in the room became almost suffocating. Even the lawyers seemed uneasy, glancing nervously at each other whenever the judge raised his voice. Opposing counsel, a slick, well-dressed man representing the official suing Karoline, looked torn between defending his client and distancing himself from the judge's behavior. At one point, he cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "Your Honor, perhaps we should focus on the facts of the case." "Don't tell me how to run my courtroom," Judge Grayson snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. The lawyer immediately fell silent, shrinking back into his seat. Karoline couldn't believe what she was witnessing. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and the principles the justice system was supposed to uphold. And yet here they were, watching a man in a position of power abuse it without consequence. It was infuriating, but also strangely motivating. If anything, Judge Grayson's behavior only strengthened her resolve to fight harder. Then, just as things seemed to reach their breaking point, something unexpected happened. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, drawing everyone's attention. A tall, confident woman stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate respect. She scanned the room quickly before taking a seat near the front, her sharp gaze landing briefly on Karoline. There was no mistaking who she was. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General known for her fearless approach to holding people accountable. For a moment, the entire courtroom froze. Even Judge Grayson paused mid-rant, clearly startled by her sudden appearance. Pam Bondi didn't say a word at first, she simply observed, her expression unreadable, but Karoline felt a surge of hope. She didn't know why Pam was there, but she couldn't ignore the timing. Something told her this day was about to take an even bigger turn, and she was right. Pam Bondi's arrival felt like a bolt of lightning in the middle of a storm. The courtroom, already tense from Judge Grayson's verbal assaults, seemed to hold its collective breath as she walked in. She carried herself with authority, her posture straight, her steps deliberate, and her eyes scanning the room with purpose. People whispered among themselves, trying to figure out why someone of her stature was there. Was she representing Karoline, observing the case, or was this something else entirely? Karoline glanced at Pam, unsure what to think. She had heard about Pam Bondi's reputation, a no-nonsense advocate for justice who didn't shy away from taking on powerful opponents. But she hadn't expected to see her here, in this moment when things felt so hopeless. For the first time since the hearing began, Karoline allowed herself a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Pam's presence meant that help was on the way. Judge Grayson, however, didn't seem fazed, at least not at first. He continued his tirade against Karoline, dismissing her arguments and interrupting her whenever she tried to speak. But as Pam settled into her seat, he paused mid-sentence, finally acknowledging her presence. "Do we have another participant joining us?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or are you here just to observe?" Pam rose slowly to her feet, her movements calm but commanding. She turned to face the judge, her expression unreadable but undeniably serious. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension in the room, "I'm here because I've been following this case closely." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The courtroom fell silent again, everyone waiting to see where this was going. Even Judge Grayson seemed momentarily thrown off balance. He adjusted his robe, leaning slightly forward as if bracing himself. "And what exactly is your interest in this matter?" he asked, his tone sharper now, almost offensive. Pam didn't hesitate. "My interest lies in ensuring that justice is served, not just for those sitting in this courtroom, but for the public whose trust in the system hangs in the balance." She let her statement sink in before continuing. "From what I've observed today, Your Honor, it appears there may be some concerns about impartiality and fairness." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Spectators exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement while others looked uneasy. Judge Grayson's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "Are you suggesting that I'm being unfair?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Because if you're accusing me of misconduct, you'd better have evidence to back it up." Pam met his gaze without flinching. "Actually, Your Honor, I do." Her response sent a ripple through the room. Karoline's heart skipped a beat. What evidence could Pam possibly have? And more importantly, how had she gathered it so quickly? Before anyone could react, Pam reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. She opened it calmly, flipping through the pages as though she were reviewing notes. Then, looking directly at the judge, she said, "Over the past few months, credible reports have surfaced alleging unethical behavior on your part. Specifically, accusations involving preferential treatment in exchange for personal favors." The room erupted in whispers. Judge Grayson's face turned beet red, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bench. "This is outrageous," he shouted, slamming his gavel down hard enough to make the sound echo. "You can't just walk in here and accuse me of such things without proof." "Oh, but I can," Pam replied, her tone firm but composed. "And I have. These documents outline multiple instances where decisions made in your courtroom appear to benefit individuals with close ties to you personally or professionally. There are also witness statements corroborating these claims." Karoline stared at Pam, stunned. She hadn't realized the depth of corruption surrounding Judge Grayson, or that Pam had already done so much groundwork. It was as though Pam had been preparing for this moment long before stepping foot in the courtroom. Judge Grayson sputtered, clearly struggling to regain control of the situation. This is an attack on my integrity. I won't stand for it," he stammered, pointing a finger at Pam. But his bluster only made him look guiltier. The confidence he had displayed earlier was crumbling under the weight of Pam's accusations. Pam remained unfazed. "Your Honor, I'm not here to attack anyone. I'm here to ensure accountability. That's why I've filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Commission. Furthermore, based on the evidence we've compiled, I believe immediate action is necessary, including your suspension pending investigation." The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the courtroom as people processed what Pam was saying. Judge Grayson looked like he'd been punched in the gut. For the first time, his bravado faltered, replaced by sheer panic. "You can't do this," he protested weakly, his voice trembling. "This is absurd." But Pam wasn't finished. She turned to address the bailiff standing nearby. "Officer, please contact the appropriate authorities. We need to secure the premises until further notice." As deputies arrived moments later, Judge Grayson's world unraveled completely. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists as he was escorted out of the courtroom, his once commanding presence reduced to nothing more than a defeated man shuffling toward humiliation. The crowd watched in stunned silence, barely able to believe what they had just witnessed. For Karoline, it was both surreal and empowering. She never imagined that standing up for the truth would lead to such a dramatic confrontation, or that someone like Pam Bondi would step in to fight alongside her. As the chaos subsided and the reality of what had happened began to sink in, Karoline realized one thing. Justice might be messy, but it was always worth fighting for. The courtroom was in shock. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time had frozen the moment Judge Grayson was led out in handcuffs. The man who had spent years ruling the courtroom with an iron fist now looked small and powerless. His head bowed as he shuffled past rows of stunned spectators. Some people stared in disbelief while others whispered quietly, trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. For Karoline, it felt surreal, like a scene from a movie rather than real life. Pam Bondi stood near the front of the room, her expression calm but resolute. She glanced at Karoline briefly, giving her a subtle nod before turning her attention back to the deputies escorting Judge Grayson away. There was no triumph in Pam's demeanor, only a quiet determination to see justice served. But for Karoline, that single nod meant everything. It was a gesture of solidarity, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. As the doors closed behind Judge Grayson, the room erupted into murmurs again. Lawyers exchanged hushed conversations, reporters scrambled to take notes, and ordinary citizens debated what had just unfolded. One woman sitting near Karoline leaned over and said softly, "I hope you know how brave you are." Karoline managed a weak smile but didn't respond. She was still processing everything, the insults, the accusations, and now this sudden reversal of power. Pam stepped forward, addressing the remaining court officers and attendees. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and clear, "today is a reminder that no one is above accountability, not even those entrusted with upholding the law. What happened here isn't about personal vendettas or political agendas. It's about protecting the integrity of our justice system." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present. Even opposing counsel, who had been so eager to discredit Karoline earlier, seemed shaken. He gathered his papers silently, avoiding eye contact with anyone as he prepared to leave. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. It was no longer tense or hostile. Instead, there was a sense of reflection, almost reverence. Once the crowd began to disperse, Pam approached Karoline. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, placing a hand on Karoline's shoulder. Karoline nodded, though her eyes betrayed the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "This isn't how I expected things to go." Pam smiled faintly. "Life rarely goes the way we expect it to. But sometimes when we stand firm in the face of adversity, unexpected allies show up to help us carry the load." Her words were simple, yet they carried immense weight. Karoline felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had spent so long fighting battles on her own, convinced that taking a stand came with isolation. Now she realized that courage could inspire others to join the fight. Before leaving, Pam handed Karoline a business card. "If you ever need advice, or just someone to talk to, you can reach me anytime," she said sincerely. "You've done something important here, not just for yourself but for everyone who believes in fairness. Keep going." Karoline held onto the card tightly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As she left the courthouse, the bright sunlight outside felt like a metaphor for the clarity she now had. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be critics, skeptics, and challenges. But she knew she wasn't walking it alone anymore. Later that evening, Karoline sat at her kitchen table, replaying the day's events in her mind. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, texts from friends, emails from colleagues, and requests for interviews from news outlets eager to cover her story. At first, she ignored them, needing a moment to herself to process everything. But eventually, curiosity got the better of her, and she opened her laptop to see what people were saying online. Social media was ablaze with reactions. Some praised her bravery, calling her a hero for standing up to corruption. Others questioned whether she had gone too far, accusing her of ruining lives without considering the consequences. Mixed in with the comments were messages of support from strangers, people who thanked her for shining a light on issues they cared about. Reading through them, Karoline felt a strange mix of pride and humility. She hadn't set out to become a public figure, but now that she was, she vowed to use her platform wisely. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Karoline thought about Pam Bondi's parting words. "Keep going." Those two words echoed in her mind, pushing aside any lingering doubts or fears. She realized that this case wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. There were still stories to uncover, truths to expose, and injustices to challenge. And somewhere, deep down, she knew that Judge Grayson's downfall wasn't just about holding one corrupt official accountable. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that even the most powerful figures could be challenged when enough people refused to stay silent. Karoline drifted off to sleep with a newfound determination burning in her heart. Whatever came next, she was ready. The days following the courtroom drama felt like a whirlwind for Karoline. The story of Judge Grayson's arrest spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and sparking conversations across the country. People were divided. Some hailed Karoline as a hero who had taken on a corrupt system, while others accused her of overstepping boundaries and causing unnecessary chaos. But no matter what side of the debate people stood on, one thing was clear. The case had ignited a national conversation about accountability, justice, and the role of journalists in exposing wrongdoing. Karoline found herself at the center of it all. Her phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters, producers, and even activists wanting to hear her side of the story. At first, she tried to keep up, granting interviews and answering questions as honestly as she could. But after a few days, the attention became overwhelming. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and sometimes downright scary. One morning, as she sipped coffee at her kitchen table, Karoline decided to take a step back. She turned off her phone, closed her laptop, and went for a long walk through the park near her apartment. The crisp autumn air helped clear her mind, and for the first time in days she felt a sense of calm. As she strolled past families playing with their kids and couples chatting on benches, she reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference. But the world outside wasn't slowing down for her. Back home later that afternoon, she flipped on the news and saw updates about Judge Grayson's legal troubles. Investigators had uncovered more evidence tying him to shady dealings, bribes, favors, and rigged rulings. What had started as Pam Bondi's complaint had snowballed into a full-blown investigation, with authorities digging deeper into Grayson's past. Each new revelation made the headlines louder and more dramatic than the last. Karoline couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, she was glad that the truth was coming out. Justice was finally catching up to someone who had abused his power for years. But on the other hand, she knew that every scandal came with collateral damage. Families were affected, careers were ruined, and communities were left questioning whom they could trust. It was a sobering reminder that fighting for truth often meant navigating a minefield of consequences. Amid the chaos, Pam Bondi reached out again. This time it wasn't just to offer support, it was to propose an idea. "Karoline," Pam said, during their phone call, "this case has shown how much work still needs to be done. People need to understand their rights and they need tools to hold officials accountable. I want to start something, a nonprofit focused on educating citizens and advocating for transparency. Would you be interested in joining me?" Karoline froze, stunned by the question. A partnership with Pam Bondi. It sounded incredible, but also daunting. Could she really step into such a big role? After a moment of hesitation, she replied, "I'd love to help, but are you sure I'm the right person for this? I'm just a journalist." Pam laughed softly. "You're not just anything, Karoline. You've already proven that. You have the courage and determination to make change happen. That's exactly what we need." Her words stuck with Karoline long after the call ended. For so long she had seen herself as an outsider, an observer shining a light on problems but leaving the solutions to others. Now, Pam was inviting her to take a more active role, to be part of creating lasting change. It was both exciting and terrifying, but deep down, Karoline knew it was the right path. Over the next few weeks, the two women began working together to lay the groundwork for their nonprofit. They brainstormed ideas, reached out to potential partners, and drafted plans for workshops and campaigns aimed at empowering ordinary people. Karoline threw herself into the project, finding joy in collaborating with someone as passionate and experienced as Pam. Together, they envisioned a future where everyone, not just lawyers or politicians, could play a role in holding those in power accountable. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson's trial loomed on the horizon. The former judge was now facing multiple charges, including corruption, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. His once imposing presence in court was replaced by a defeated man sitting quietly beside his defense team. Media coverage painted him as a cautionary tale, a warning to anyone who thought they were untouchable. Karoline attended some of the early hearings, not because she wanted revenge, but because she felt it was important to see the process through. Watching Grayson answer for his actions gave her a sense of closure. It wasn't about gloating or celebrating his downfall, it was about witnessing accountability in action. And while she didn't enjoy seeing anyone humiliated, she couldn't deny feeling a quiet satisfaction, knowing that justice was being served. As the weeks turned into months, Karoline began to notice subtle changes in herself. She was more confident, more determined, and less afraid of speaking her mind. The experience had taught her that standing up for what was right wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. She realized that courage wasn't about never feeling fear. It was about moving forward despite it. One evening, as she sat on her couch watching the sunset, Karoline reflected on how far she'd come. From the young journalist chasing stories to the woman now helping build a movement for transparency, her journey had been anything but predictable. She smiled to herself, thinking about all the challenges she had faced and overcome. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face it head-on. And somewhere deep inside, she felt grateful, not just for Pam Bondi's intervention, but for the opportunity to grow, learn, and make a difference. Life might not always go according to plan, but sometimes the detours lead to the most meaningful destinations. Months passed, and Judge Grayson's case finally reached its climax. The courtroom was packed once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was no hostility in the air, only a sense of anticipation as people waited to hear the verdict. Reporters lined up outside, cameras ready to capture every moment. Inside, the gallery buzzed with quiet whispers, everyone wondering whether justice would truly prevail. Karoline sat near the back, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't planned to attend the trial at first, but Pam Bondi had encouraged her to be there. "This isn't just about him," Pam had said. "It's about showing the world that accountability exists, even for those who think they're untouchable." So here she was, watching as the jury filed into the room, their faces unreadable. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, the entire courtroom fell silent. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts," he announced, his voice steady and clear. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Some people clapped softly, while others simply nodded in approval. For Karoline, the moment felt surreal. Months of tension, frustration, and uncertainty had led to this, a simple declaration of guilt that carried so much weight. Judge Grayson showed no emotion as the judge overseeing the case sentenced him to prison. His head remained down, his shoulders slumped as if he already knew there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. When the bailiffs escorted him out of the courtroom, no one spoke. It was over. Justice had been served. As Karoline stepped outside afterward, the bright sunlight hit her face and she took a deep breath. The reporters swarmed around her immediately, microphones thrust toward her, asking for reactions. "What does this mean for you?" one asked. "How do you feel now that it's done?" Another chimed in. Karoline paused for a moment before answering. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about proving that no one is above the law, not even someone with a title or a gavel. What happened today gives hope to anyone who's ever felt powerless." Her words resonated with the crowd, and soon, the story of Judge Grayson's downfall became a symbol of accountability. News outlets praised Karoline for her courage and persistence, calling her a role model for aspiring journalists and activists alike. But despite the praise, Karoline didn't let it go to her head. She knew the real work wasn't done yet. Back home, Karoline threw herself into the nonprofit she and Pam Bondi had started. They called it Voices for Justice, a name that perfectly captured their mission, empowering everyday citizens to speak up against corruption and demand transparency. Together, they organized workshops, created educational materials, and launched campaigns aimed at teaching people how to navigate the legal system and hold officials accountable. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful, and Karoline found fulfillment in knowing she was making a tangible difference. One of their first initiatives focused on helping people file complaints against unethical behavior in government offices. They set up a hotline where callers could report suspicious activity anonymously, ensuring that fear of retaliation wouldn't stop them from coming forward. Within weeks, the hotline was flooded with tips. Some were minor grievances, but others pointed to serious issues that needed immediate attention. Each call reinforced Karoline's belief that ordinary people could spark extraordinary change when given the right tools. Pam Bondi played a crucial role in guiding the organization, using her experience as a former attorney general to shape its direction. She mentored Karoline, sharing insights about leadership, strategy, and resilience. Under Pam's guidance, Karoline began to see herself not just as a journalist, but as an advocate, a bridge between the public and the systems meant to serve them. Their partnership grew stronger with each passing day, built on mutual respect and a shared vision for a better future. But running the nonprofit wasn't without challenges. Funding was tight, and there were days when Karoline wondered if they'd be able to keep going. Then she'd remember why they started, to give a voice to those who felt silenced, and the doubts would fade. Every success, no matter how small, reminded her that their efforts mattered. Whether it was helping someone file a complaint or raising awareness about judicial misconduct, every step forward counted. As the months went by, Karoline noticed something remarkable happening. People were starting to take notice not just of Voices for Justice, but of the broader movement it represented. Community groups began reaching out, asking for advice on tackling local issues. Schools invited Karoline to speak to students about the importance of civic engagement. Even politicians started paying attention, promising reforms to address the very problems Karoline had exposed. It wasn't long before Karoline realized she wanted to do more. While journalism had been her entry point into this world, she now understood that real change often required working within the system itself. Inspired by Pam's example, she decided to pursue a law degree, not to leave journalism behind, but to expand her ability to affect change. "If I'm going to fight for justice," she told Pam one evening, "I want to have every tool available to me." Pam smiled proudly. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Karoline enrolled in night classes, balancing her studies with her work at the nonprofit. It wasn't easy juggling both responsibilities, but she thrived on the challenge. Late at all, nights spent poring over textbooks and writing essays reminded her of the dedication it took to uncover the truth in her reporting. And though the road ahead was long, she embraced it with open arms. Through it all, Karoline never forgot where she came from, or the lessons she'd learned along the way. Standing up to Judge Grayson had taught her that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about pushing through fear because you believed in something bigger than yourself. Working with Pam had shown her the power of collaboration and mentorship, and building Voices for Justice had proven that even the smallest voices could make waves when united by a common purpose. One evening, as she closed her laptop after finishing an assignment, Karoline glanced at the business card Pam had given her months ago. She picked it up, tracing the edges with her fingers, and smiled. That single act of support had changed everything. For her, for Pam, and for countless others who now had a platform to demand fairness. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Karoline knew one thing for certain: she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years passed, and Karoline's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. What had started as a single investigation into corruption had snowballed into a movement that touched lives far beyond her small community. Voices for Justice grew from a fledgling nonprofit into a nationwide force, inspiring people to demand transparency and hold those in power accountable. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were setbacks, doubters, and moments when Karoline questioned whether they were making any real progress. But every time she saw someone step forward to report wrongdoing or challenge injustice, she knew it was worth it. By the time Karoline graduated law school, she had become a household name, not because of fame, but because of trust. People believed in her sincerity, her determination, and her unwavering commitment to fairness. She didn't seek the spotlight. Instead, she used it to amplify the voices of others. Whether speaking at rallies, testifying before legislative committees, or mentoring young activists, Karoline remained grounded in her mission to empower ordinary citizens to stand up against corruption. Pam Bondi stayed by her side throughout the journey, their partnership evolving into a deep friendship. Pam often joked that Karoline had surpassed her as a leader, but there was no denying the impact they'd made together. Their nonprofit had expanded its reach, tackling issues ranging from voter suppression to police accountability. They even launched a scholarship program to support underprivileged students pursuing careers in law and journalism, ensuring that the next generation would carry the torch. Despite her success, Karoline never forgot the struggles that shaped her. Late nights studying, early mornings answering calls on the hotline, and countless hours spent strategizing with Pam reminded her how hard-fought every victory was. But she also learned to celebrate the wins, no matter how small. Every complaint filed, every policy changed, and every person empowered felt like another brick laid in the foundation of a fairer society. One day, while attending a conference on civic engagement, Karoline found herself reflecting on how much things had changed since Judge Grayson's trial. The memory of that courtroom showdown still lingered vividly in her mind. The tension, the insults, the moment Pam walked in and turned everything around. It had been a turning point not just for her, but for so many others who realized they weren't powerless. That realization fueled her work every day. After the conference, Karoline returned home to find an email waiting for her. It was from a young woman who had attended one of Voices for Justice's workshops. In the message, she thanked Karoline for helping her file a complaint against a local official accused of embezzling funds. "Because of you," the email read, "I feel brave enough to speak up. You showed me that my voice matters." Karoline stared at the screen, tears welling up in her eyes. This was why she did what she did. Not for accolades or recognition, but for moments like this. For every person who found courage because someone else had taken the first step. She replied immediately, encouraging the young woman to keep fighting and offering her continued support. As the years went on, Karoline's influence only grew. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story with audiences around the world. Her message was simple yet powerful. Justice doesn't belong to lawyers, judges, or politicians. It belongs to everyone. And when ordinary people come together to demand change, nothing can stop them. But perhaps the most fulfilling part of her journey was seeing the ripple effects of her work. Former workshop participants went on to lead grassroots campaigns. Students who received scholarships through Voices for Justice pursued careers dedicated to public service. Even former critics softened their stance, admitting that Karoline's persistence had sparked important conversations about ethics and accountability. Looking back, Karoline marveled at how one decision, to dig deeper into a seemingly routine story, had set off a chain reaction that changed her life and countless others. She thought about the late-night phone calls, the heated debates, and the quiet moments of doubt that had tested her resolve. Each challenge had taught her something valuable, shaping her into the person she was today. One evening, sitting on her porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, Karoline pulled out an old notebook she had kept during the early days of her career. Flipping through its pages, she smiled at the scribbled notes, half-formed ideas and reminders to stay strong. On the last page, she had written a single sentence: "Justice is messy, but it's worth fighting for." Reading those words now, she realized how true they still were. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be battles to fight and injustices to confront. But Karoline faced the future with hope. She had seen firsthand what was possible when people refused to stay silent, when they chose to act despite fear. And as long as there were voices willing to speak up, she knew the fight for justice would continue. In the end, Karoline understood that her story wasn't really about her. It was about all the people who had stood beside her, supported her, and joined her in the pursuit of truth. Together they had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and determination could shine a light in the darkest corners. And that light? It burned brighter than ever.